today we continue with the effect of trimming and shoeing. So it will be maybe a little bit more practical with relation to your work and maybe practical work. But I don't want to disappoint you. It's also that this is a parameter which is quite interesting and quite relevant in practice. But there are many different factors interacting with your work. So don't be disappointed if in the end of the day, it's not the result that you are the one who has the most influence. I would like to give you some facts and some objective findings of the latest research that you can discuss with your clients, the trainers, and maybe the veterinarians, a few things regarding stride length, and that you can judge horses a little bit better to optimize your impact on the soundness and also on the performance of the horses. Yeah. So again, today trimming and shoeing with regard to stride length. And we already learned that the stride length is more or less related to the range of motion of different segments of the locomotor system. So not just the limbs, but also the movement of the back. So the flexibility of the back and the sideway motion of the back in combination with the function of the limbs is very important to have an optimal stride length. And a good increased stride length and a good range of motion of the limbs is more or less judged as a good and efficient performance, and it's associated with a good motion quality in, for example, dressage or other disciplines. Yeah, so in particular dressage, it's also findings in research that horses with increased or long strides are usually judged better than horses with short strides. And in racing, we already learned from the last time that increasing stride length is one of the key factors to increase speed and to have a successful race. Yeah, and other disciplines, for example, endurance, but also pleasure riding, for example, is associated with specific criteria with regard to stride length. Yeah, so it's more or less an important parameter in the first view in performance and athletics. But we will see it's also important, yeah, more or less in orthopedic relations. Yeah. So if we conclude from the last times, the stride length is a factor associated with improving gait quality and increasing velocity if we focus on sport horses. Yeah, and there's also some research done. So this is a study from an American research group, quite good, with Sarah Hobbs and also Hilary Clayton. And they did a lot of research with regard to the performance of sport horses, in particular to dressage horses. And all parameters highlighted in purple are associated with stride length. So it's a parameter influencing the quality of canter, lead change, trot, yeah, and some other facts, tasks in dressage. So there's a lot of research going on with regard to step length or stride length. And there's some good research, again, from the same research group, showing that with increasing velocity, for example, in dressage, from collected, medium to extended trot, the stride length increase. And otherwise, with increasing collection of the horse, the stride length decrease. Yeah? But the changes in velocity in general rely on the ability to adjust to the stride length. So this is why we discuss it actually, because sometimes some owners, some dressage riders or other athletic riders will ask you to increase stride length, to have a good range of motion, to have an impressive flight arc. Yeah? So they ask you to increase the gait quality. But today I would like to focus a little bit on other factors influencing gait quality, and you are maybe one little wheel in the whole system to improve this parameter. Yeah, but this is sometimes a demand of our customers that they say they would like to have a shoeing or trimming, particular shoeing, to improve the gait quality of horses. Yeah, but we already discussed that horses, in particular the body conformation of horses, is a very, very important factor if we speak about gait quality and stride length. Because it's known in research or literature that horses with a sloped and long shoulder and more extension and more flexibility in the fetlock are doing longer strides. And horses with longer legs, for example, longer metacarpus, they also do longer strides. And it's the same with the hind limbs. So horses with more slope in the pelvis or more angulation in the tarsus, and also again more flexibility and elasticity in the fetlock, are also doing more and longer strides. So this is in one thing an ergonomic and efficient movement, but with breeding and training, we try to increase these factors and these conformations. So we try to create conformations fitting to our demands on a good gait quality. Yeah, so but if you look on these horses who has a sloped pelvis or a sloped shoulder, or who has an elastic and extended fetlock, these horses are usually not the most sound horses. Yeah, so of course, in a certain range, it's okay. So in a normal, good ridden horse, long legs and a normal shoulder and good flexibility in the joints and high range of motion are okay. But if we have a high training frequency, if we have a high intensity in our load on the horse, if we increase these parameters with our breeding, yeah, then we might have horses which are able to have a long stride and have a good motion quality. But of course, we have a high leverage and high strain on the joints and stick structures such as tendons. Yeah, this is not a problem if you have a well-trained and well-ridden horse. So if the musculature of the shoulder girdle, of the back, and of the pelvis are well developed and can bear the load, and they can more or less save the passive structures of the locomotor system, for example, joints and tendons. But the reality is that we have horses bred for more or less good athletic potential, but they are not very well trained and maybe not very well kept. So we have high leverage and increased strain on the tendons and the joints. The musculature can't stay it, or it can't bear it, it can't support it. So we have decreased strength of tendons, ligaments, and joints. And these horses usually comes in the end as orthopedic patients. Yeah, so they have an increased risk of developing disorders and injuries associated with orthopedic problems. Yeah, so the ability of a great performance is not automatically associated with a good soundness, and these horses usually develop the injuries we know more or less good from our daily praxis. Yeah, so just to keep in mind that, of course, horses sometimes bring good potential with their locomotor system, but it's the task and the responsibility of the trainer and the rider to strengthen the horse, to support the horse, to bring the performance without being in the risk of developing injuries. Yeah, so our main aim as farriers and maybe veterinarians, but mainly farriers, is to trim and shoe horses to support their athletic performance for sure, but we would like to keep the horses sound. We would like to, our main task is actually to prevent injuries and disorders. Yeah, so this is why actually we can focus on gait quality such as stride length, but always in the context of the individual horse and its conformation, not just the complete body conformation, but also the status of the musculature. Yeah, so it's not useful to increase stride length by shoeing. You will see there are some possibilities to increase the stride length with our shoeing, but it's not useful if you increase the risk of developing injuries. Yeah. So, and just this little introduction, still I would like to show you some effects of trimming and shoeing on the stride length, but it's your responsibility how you use it. Yeah, I will show you some literature data, and I will show you latest research findings from our study 2 years ago on found warm blood horses in one stable, and you will see the data on firm ground. Yeah. So again, we just measured the horses with the black system and did some documentations, and all data I will present you are speed corrected, because we know that also the stride length is a parameter which is mainly associated or correlated with speed. So if we start with trimming, then we can conclude that a normal routine trim, I'm not talking about corrective trimming if you have long feet or some problems in the feet, just a normal routine trimming after 8 weeks did not had any significant change after before and after trimming in walk or trot in the front feet. So in the front feet, we couldn't see any significant changes. In the hind feet, it was a little bit different. In the hind feet, the trimming significantly increased the stride length in walk and trot. So this might be different because of the different tasks between the front and the hind feet or limbs. So it might be that you have a little bit more different leverage, a little bit more bearing function in the hinds. I can't really explain the finding, but this is what we at least saw in our population, and it's worth it to have a closer look in the next examinations. But just to give you some examples, so you see the front feet before and after trimming in walk and trot. Yeah, so you see in walk, for example, it's not really changing. It was 170 centimeters and it is after trimming with 169 centimeters. And again, in trot, we also just see a increase of 2 centimeters in this horse, which is not really a lot. Yeah, so in the front feet, the effect of trimming is more or less compensated. Yeah. But what is a little bit more interesting is if we speak about the effect of shoeing. So there was some research done. This Dutch group, investigated the effect of shoeing on the gait quality of horses. And they saw that not just the flight arc, the height of the flight arc increased about 70%, and the range of motion of the limb joints also increased, but also the stride length and stride duration increased. Yeah? So this is usually judged as an improvement of gait quality, but it has to be said that all horses were shot the first time. So there's always the question, what happened after a few days, after a few weeks during the shoeing cycle? So is there some adaptation or not? So this is a question we will also speak about in a few minutes. But we can conclude for now that shoeing itself increased stride length due to increased weight on the hoof in the end of the distal limb. Yeah. So this is just an example from our study where we had the same finding. In average, we had a significant increase in stride length, about 3 to 4 centimeters in walk and trot. And the effect was clearer in the front feet. This is probably because we have a little bit more pendulum on the front feet. Yeah, so here we see an increase about 7 centimeters compared between barefoot and shod with a normal steel shoe. Yeah, in trot. But there's some research done. What happened after a while? What happened after, for example, a shoeing cycle? And this also Dutch research group concluded that horses can compensate changes, for example, of hoof morphology, and probably also from shoeing during a shoeing interval to maintain their neuromuscular pattern of movement. So this is actually related to the automation of locomotion. And this automation of locomotion keep more or less a stable locomotion pattern of horses. Sorry. Yeah, and don't be scared from this slide. I will explain it to you because this is quite interesting, because this was a study really focusing on the long-term effect, or at least a few days effect of shoeing and change of toe angulation. So this group took a few horses and then they compared the stride length between 3 shoeing conditions, from a normal flat standard steel shoeing, and then with toe elevation, so a very flat conformation, acute hoof angle, and then with the heel elevation, so with a steeper hoof angulation. And then they checked the stride length at the moment of shoeing, so at moment 0, and then after 2 days and after 4 days. Yeah. So they also concluded they had no significant differences, but they also state they have tendencies. So in this case, it's worth it to look at the tendencies as well, because if you look after shoeing, so up from barefoot to normal shoeing, yeah, during the next days, the stride length decreased again. So we had the effect described in the literature that with increased weight in the end of the distal limb at the hoof, the stride length increased in the first moment, but then after a few days, it decreased again, probably because the horses adapted to the weight change. Yeah? Then they said after a toe elevation, as if we create a very acute hoof angulation, the stride length increased again after a few days. I would explain it like this. If you have a more acute hoof angle, if you create a flatter hoof conformation, you have more strain on the deep digital flexor tendon in the porotrochlear, and this might cause discomfort. But during the next days, usually horses, if you observe them, they try to compensate. So they try to find other posture. They adapt more or less with the tendon strain. They adapt to the angle change. So the discomfort decrease and probably the stride length increase again. In the final part of the lecture, we will speak about the relationship between step length and discomfort or comfort and how it influences. And you will see this is indeed a factor which has an impact on the stride length. Heel elevation itself did not change in stride length after a few days, so this was more or less the same. But I think the first two facts are quite interesting for our work if we focus on long-term effects and adaptation. I would say after a few weeks, the horses are back to their normal individual locomotion pattern, just from my own practical observations. Yeah. So then it's also interesting how different shoe designs, for example, in this case, the modifications of the toe. So if we have roll toe, for example, or if we change the shoe position to influence the breakover, this did not change the stride length significantly, at least not in the studies of this group. And I can also say not really from our studies. The assumption was actually in the past that if you have a straight toe without any eased breakover, then you have a little bit more leverage, you have a little bit more resistance against the ground. So usually the push off is a little bit more, this is stronger, and you create a higher flight arc and a longer flight arc and thereby a longer stride length. This was actually the assumption. It could not be proved, not in the past research and not in our research. The only research where you see some effects of changing shoe position and toe design is on penetrable ground. If you look at the Western horses, so if you have the Western pleasure horses, and this group examined, for example, if you compare the setback shoe with a palmally placed breakover compared to a perimeter fit shoe, then they saw that you have an increased range of motion again in the limb joints and longer strides in the horses shot with a perimeter fit shoe. Yeah, this might be because of a little bit more pressure, a little bit more push off to have the propulsion of the limb to swing face, and this might also increase the stride length. But this was examined on penetrable ground and in a very specific discipline. If you do examinations on firm ground and with a different modified toe region, you cannot see real effects on the stride length. Yeah, so it's not relevant if you have a flat toe and a rocker compared to a rocker toe shoe, or for example, in our study, if you compare the flat shoe with a roll toe and a palmally placed setback shoe. Yeah, so this horse had more or less kept the same motion pattern of the flight arc, and it also had more or less the same stride length. At least it was not significant if you compared all 10 horses. It might be in single cases, in particular if you have orthopedic patients, we will see later on, that this might have an effect. So if you improve comfort, if you ease the dynamics of the horse and you have a horse with suffering from some problems, this might be a completely different view. But in a normal sound horse on firm ground, the conformation or the conditions of the toe had no effect on the stride length. Yeah, but definitely increase in weight. So this was studied in gaited horses. So if you increase weight, for example, with long toes and heavy shoes filled with pads and packing, then this study showed quite nice from a Swiss group that you lower the stride frequency and increase step length and the height of the flight arc. So this is actually what people would like to see if they judge gaited horses. But we also learned from the, I think from the webinar with the flight arc, with the swing phase, that if you increase weight and you have an expressive flight arc and long strides, the muscles has to work a lot. So all stabilizing muscles, I just repeat, for example, the shoulder girdle, the triceps, the biceps, the muscles which has to stabilize extension and flexion of the distal limb, all these muscles has to work a lot to compensate the high weight on the hoof and to stabilize the movement in the high flight arc and in the long strides. So it's known that this is not, it is improving maybe the gait quality, but this is more or less awful for the muscular and the orthopedic system. Yeah. And this is just a nice side study I found. I thought it's just interesting because I just thought with increasing rider weight, also the stride length decrease. So sometimes you are asked to make little thing to improve the gait quality and increase stride length, and then there's a heavy rider on the horse. So sometimes it's worth it to have a look how the horse is ridden, not just the rider weight, but also how he is riding the horse. Because we also learned the higher the horse is ridden with a high pull, definitely have shorter strides, and with higher collection also the strides become shorter. This can be wanted, but in a few times if the rider is not really skilled, this can be also just a side effect of bad riding. Yeah, so sometimes it's not just you who is responsible for the stride quality, but also the rider. Yeah. But there's also the other way around. We can also decrease the weight. For example, if we use aluminum for shoeing. Past research could not really find an effect, but with our technique, we definitely saw changes. So we already learned that if we compare the shoeing with steel shoes, with aluminum shoes, that the height of the flight arc definitely decrease, yeah, because we have less mass on the hoofs. We have less weight, so we have less pendulum, so we have a little bit lower flight arc and also shorter strides. And this decreased the impact peak during landing, and this is often useful in orthopedic cases. So if you have horses suffering from bone diseases, for example, arthrosis, podotorlosis, or anything related to bones, usually they benefit if they don't have such a hard impact peak. And this is possible if you use aluminum shoes, for example, or if we decrease weight with any measure we know, and then we have shorter strides and not such an expressive flight arc, but the horses are more comfortable. Yeah. Then there's also the assumption that if you change the hoof angulation, that you should see an effect on the stride length. In the past, there was the assumption if you have acute hoof angles, you have longer leverage in the toe, you have more moment arm and a little bit more propulsion to spring phase, and you have a higher and a little bit earlier peak of the height of the flight arc and increased strides. This has to be rejected because actually in the past it could not be shown by Hilary Clayton again. And also in our studies, we saw no effect of, for example, heel elevation on the stride length. Yeah, so this is something which is actually not really true, in particular not in the range of reorientation we can use in a praxis of maybe 5 degrees maximum. Yeah. The same is relevant for side wedges. So if you change the mediolateral orientation of the hoofs, usually you also have no effect on the stride length. And so this is actually also the same pattern. So horses are masters in compensating changes. You, I think, know it from your daily work. But I think it's never worth it to do a severe reorientation just to improve gait quality quality, because long term it's not really useful for the horses. Yeah. But there's also the question how different types of horseshoes affect the stride length. We also did some research on this, although in the past in the literature there was not really significant findings, but we thought we examined not just the angle change, but we also examined, for example, the egg bar shoe and the lateral extension shoe. And in contrast to previous research, we could find that the use of egg bar shoes significantly increased the stride length in this horse almost 15 centimeters. Yeah, so this is probably related on the creation and the design of the egg bar shoes, as we used quite wide and quite heavy welding parts. So usually a normal welding part to create such a bar shoe is more or less with 40 grams. So this is quite something, in particular if you added palmar on the foot. So if you change the weight distribution on the hoof. Yeah. So I could say the more it reaches out from the hoof silhouette, the more is the effect of the weight. So if you create, for example, hard bar shoes, this effect is not as obvious as if you would use a long egg bar shoe. Yeah, so the higher the weight and the longer, for example, the palmar extension, the more effect it has on the stride length, in this case with an increase of stride length. And this is the same if you use, for example, lateral extensions, for example. It's a bit the same. You can do a wide branch shoe if you weld the part inside of the hoof capsule, of the hoof shape. But in the moment you create a lateral extension and you use the welding part to increase surface and also weight in this part, in this case, you definitely also increase the stride length. Yeah. With toe weights, we and also previous research had no effects on the stride length. This is what I said. Usually if you just add weight inside the hoof shape, then the effect of the weight is usually not as strong as if you would add it outside. Yeah, and just a side thing, the use of corks or studs did not increase or change stride length in any way. So this is probably also not really something you should try. But, and this is again quite important, if you increase comfort and you decrease pain. There was a very nice study in laminitic horses. So usually laminitic horses, they suffer from quite strong pain, and their stride length is in average reduced by 11%, which is quite a lot. And then this research group tried different applications of wooden clogs, and they compared the stride length between barefoot and the use of these clogs, and they could see when horses were shod with the wooden clogs, they increased stride length again. So this is one hint that examining the stride length in orthopedic patients is a quite interesting and maybe reliable parameter to do follow-up examinations of your orthopedic patient through the treatment. So if you examine your patient from status quo to the next intervals, then you see hopefully an increase in stride length and some changes in the timing, and these parameters might be useful to monitor your patients and your work with them. Yeah. And I have another case. This was the horse suffering from quite severe podal trochlosis. It had a quite heavy shoeing and also not really nice shoeing. It was also not really well in the shoe position and also not in the design of the shoe. So it was quite lame and not very comfortable. And after shoeing the horse with a little bit better breakover and with pads and packing with very soft material and a little bit lighter with aluminum, you could see, although we have a change in the weight, yeah, that from the moment we saw the horse the first time to directly after shoeing with pads and packings, it increased the stride length about 11 centimeters, which is quite something. So this is a direct change, which is not really normal. So you could say, okay, this horse increased the stride length. So this is also a hint for more comfort and less pain. Yeah, so it's worth it to check the stride length as follow-up examination in your orthopedic patients. So if we conclude the main findings of this webinar, we could say that with increasing weight, with increasing comfort and with reducing pain, we have good chances to increase the stride length, to optimize the performance of the horse, the gait quality, and hopefully the soundness as well. Yeah, but we have to accept that we have factors interacting with our work, and this is mainly the body conformation, the range of motion of the limb and joints in the back. Yeah, so that you have the function of the whole locomotor system interacting with you. Also the muscle status and the riding itself, so the head neck position and the degree of collection during riding. And we learned that the shoulder needs some freedom to gain a good range of motion, to have long strides, and therefore the saddle fit is very, very important. And in the end, all kind of pain reduce the stride length itself. And this is just not something you can do by your own. So you have, if you would like to improve the gait quality of horses, you always have to work with a trainer, with a rider, and with a veterinarian. If you do it, then I think you have good chances to reach the optimal motion quality of the athletic horse. Yeah. So this is just what I wanted to tell you. So the webinars maybe not just focused or not just aiming to show you what you can do with your shoeing. I think my main aim was to show you all the factors interacting with your work, and that you can judge horses a little bit better, and more important, that you can have a good and objective discussion and communications with your colleagues. So for example, the rider, the owner, and the veterinarian. Yeah, so this was maybe a little bit shorter webinar because the effect of shoeing is maybe not that great. Yeah, but I wanted to give you an overview, and I think therefore maybe have some time for questions if you want. We are a small group. If not, you can of course always write me or write Bergman. And I think this webinar is also recorded. So if you want, you can always see it again at the Bergman homepage.